As the United States continues to build pressure after it has raised tariff on key Indian exports to 50%, what is being seen as a blunt message, and the timing perhaps deliberate and the impact potentially severe. This isn't just a trade dispute, it's a diplomatic power play, and behind the numbers lies a deeper churn. Questions over India's global positioning, its continued oil trade with Russia, and whether New Delhi's balancing act between East and the West is finally being tested. And at a time when India aspires to shape global narratives, is it being economically cornered by the very powers it calls allies? Joining me now is someone who has both observed and shaped India's foreign policy debates. Dr. Shashi Tharoor is Senior Congress Leader, Member of Parliament, former diplomat, and one of India's most astute voices on geopolitics. Dr. Tharoor, welcome to NDTV. When the world's oldest democracy, Dr. Tharoor, punishes the world's largest with punitive tariffs, does it expose the fragile nature of the so-called value-based partnerships, or was India's strategic bet on the new US administration always transactional at its core?
Look, I mean, the fact is, yes, Mr. Trump is famously transactional. I don't think we should have any illusions about that. But what is problematic here is, first of all, the incredible unfairness of this particular imposition. Because there are other countries that buy oil from Russia and they haven't been penalized in the same way. I mean, the Chinese buy far more oil and gas from Russia, not to mention trading a whole host of other items than we do. But they've been given a 90-day negotiating window while we have only 21 days. So from 27th of August, in other words, our goods in the US will be subject to a 50% tariff, while Chinese goods come in at 30%. Now, what does that say about Mr. Trump's priorities? What happened to the strategic relationship with India? What happened to the geopolitical rivalry the US was supposed to have with China? Clearly, there is now a need for us to fundamentally rethink some of our assumptions. It may just be a negotiating tactic. Mr. Trump is a famously unpredictable and temperamental negotiator. But I'm afraid some of the language used was very, very sort of belittling. And to my mind, we may just have to insist that our self-respect doesn't permit us to surrender in this kind of process. It really, really is severely troubling.
Would you say then that this sharp escalation to 50% tariffs is less about trade and more a signal from Washington that India's independent foreign policy, particularly its ties with Russia, will carry a price tag?
Well, look, our independent foreign policy is linked very much to our national interest. Where we determine that something with the US is of greater value to our national interest than something with Russia, we will take that call. In the case of oil and gas, it's not only us. The European Union is buying more oil and gas than we are. The Chinese are buying more oil and gas than we are. We don't particularly like the idea of another country for its foreign policy goals telling us what we can and cannot buy. Not to mention that the oil and gas we buy then comes into a larger Indian mix of oil and gas from various sources. And some of our refined oil products coming out, particularly from the Jamnagar refinery, are then purchased by the very countries in Europe, in UK, US, and so on, who otherwise have been objecting. So to my mind, there is a lot of double standards in this business that's being talked about. I mean, do you realize, for example, that the US itself imports like a couple of $1 billion worth of fertilizers a year, every year from Russia? It buys something called uranium hexafluoride from them. It buys a lot of palladium, which is needed for catalytic converters. In the 5 months of this year alone, January to May of 2025, US imports from Russia stand at 2.4 billion. And the fact is that this is already representing a more than 20% increase from last year. So if that's going on, how can Mr. Trump argue that India's money is fueling Russia's war machine in Ukraine, but his American dollars are not? I mean, that's complete hypocrisy. So I really think we will have to sit and talk to the Americans. There's a negotiation going on. I'm not asking for any hot-tempered language. I'm just asking that we should stand up for our rights, point out what is going on with some of the American statements. I'm, been an advocate of our close relationship with the US. We do share democratic values, strategic interests, a history of cooperation, and there are almost 4 million Americans who trace their descent to our country. But I have to say at the same time that any friendship has to be built on mutual respect and not unilateral demands. They've got to talk reasonably with us. I'm afraid, Maria, you can't accept a situation where one side dictates terms and the other side is expected to comply without question. Those days are over. I mean, after 200 years of colonialism, we're not going to let anybody dictate to us like this. That's been an article of faith of Indian foreign policy since 1947, and no one is going to be allowed to change that today. Not Mr. Trump, certainly.
Dr. Tharoor, the Chinese ambassador to India, Xu Feihong, sharply criticized Donald Trump's decision to impose tariff, and he has said, give the bully an inch, he will make a mile. And this, of course, is coming in the backdrop of that very crucial meeting where Prime Minister Modi is traveling to China for the SCO summit. How do you look at this development, and also the fact that India is looking at some kind of rebalancing with that talk which has happened between Indian Prime Minister and his Brazilian counterpart, where the two leaders, of course, are looking at the economic scenario, because these are the two countries which have been worst impacted with regards to these tariffs from the United States?
Well, look, India is not a supplicant. I want to make it very clear. We're a proud and self-respecting nation. We have our own legitimate interests, our own red lines. And though we must empower our negotiators to spend the next 3 weeks seeking the best possible deal, and there are some concessions we can make reasonably as part of give and take in any negotiation, we must also be prepared to walk away if the American position remains unreasonable. You know perfectly well, Maria, we cannot and will not sacrifice the livelihoods of 700 million Indians who are dependent on agriculture just to appease Mr. Trump. I mean, that's not, any responsible partner nation would understand that. And in a democracy which is driven by its own influential constituencies and lobbies, they understand how these things work. If we tell them, listen, they no Indian government of any political complexion can sell their farmers down the river. They're living very close to the margins. We have farmer suicides every year. We can't suddenly give them competition from a whole bunch of subsidized American grain. It's just not feasible. So we can explain all this, and presumably, if we do it well enough, they may be able to listen. A negotiation is always about give and take on both sides. But if it turns out at the end of 3 weeks that we are told, this is our way or the highway, then I think we can take the highway, Maria. I think we will have to have some belt tightening in the short term. But I can assure you that in any case, nobody in America is going to pay 50% more for items from India, when there are countries like Vietnam, Indonesia, Pakistan, Bangladesh, so many other countries in Asia and the developing world that are only being charged 20, 19, 15, they will sell their goods to America. Why would anyone want to buy ours for 50%? So I think we in any case have to accept that 50% makes that market unviable for us anyway. So we have to sharpen the quest for other markets.
Would you say, and in your view, Dr. Tharoor, is India doing enough to build counterweights economically or diplomatically, or are we being slowly squeezed in a multipolar world that tolerates neither neutrality nor defiance?
Look, Maria, I will say to you very honestly that India has some clout of its own. We are the largest country by population in the world. We are the fourth largest economy in the world. We do represent a substantial market. A lot of countries have interest with us. We've just concluded a free trade deal with the UK. We have perhaps progress being made on a possible free trade deal with the EU. We can revive the negotiations with the Gulf countries. There's a lot of options. We should not act as if we have no options. As far as I'm concerned, India is a country that has every interest in a good relationship with the US. I mean, we do have almost 4 million of their citizens who are descended from Indian background or Indian origins, and therefore we have every interest in preserving a good relationship with them. We do share democratic values, we do share strategic interests, we've had a decent history of cooperation. So all of this is fine, but it must be reasonable. It must be based on mutual respect. That's what I'm not seeing in this conversation so far from Mr. Trump. Now, let's accept that that's his style. and let's not overreact to it. In some ways, as I pointed out on the weekend in an event where I was asked this, in some American president says that the Indian economy is dead, I don't think he expects us to take him literally. It's like the schoolyard bully telling a smaller kid, your mother is ugly. He may not even have seen the kid's mother. It's just a way of belittling the kid, making the kid feel, slightly diminished. We have to be cool-headed and calm and not overreact to these terms and this kind of language. But at the end of the day, we have our own self-respect to stand for, and we must know as a country where we are prepared to concede something and where we're not prepared to concede something. We would have to do what is in our national interest. That is the basic bottom line, Maria. And as far as India is concerned, we are not friendless. If one window shuts somewhere, another window can open somewhere else. A lot of countries would like to have good relations with India. We represent a nation with some weight in the world. If Brazil, which is a much smaller economy than ours, can stand up to America, they're the only other country, by the way, with a 50% tariff, so can we.
Dr. Tharoor, my last question to you. Here is US President almost on a daily basis taking to Twitter and making his policy announcements even as the talks are ongoing. India's response has been measured and very calibrated. But how do you deal with a bully of this nature who is constantly, who will really dial down the temperature? The temperature is at its all-time high. How do you go down from here, and who has to take that step? India can't certainly.
The real work is happening at lower levels, Maria. Mr. Trump is not sitting across the negotiating table. He is posturing, and that's part of his country. He is the leader of his country, and therefore it's part of his country's negotiating effort. But in fact, the actual nuts and bolts conversations are happening between officials of our Commerce Ministry and officials of his trade negotiators team. We must rally behind our negotiators. They carry the weight of our national interest. We must encourage them to have both the courage and the clarity to defend it. But at the end of the day, what the political world has to convey to our negotiators is that while flexibility is a virtue, it has its limits. We can't buckle under pressure. And I must say that I'm hoping that our negotiators will go with open minds. I'm sure we don't have to be unreasonable on every issue. There are some issues on which we can make small concessions. I've often cited the example of Mr. Trump's insistence on selling us Harley Davidson motorcycles during his first term. India rightly conceded that because it made no difference to the vast majority of Indians. They used to sell about 83 Harley Davidsons. After we lowered tariffs, they sold about 280 Harley Davidsons. How many Indians are affected by all this? How much does it hurt the economy? Not at all. So like that, there will be items on which we can give in to the Americans because there will be items which only a small percentage of Indians, affluent Indians, can afford. Why not give the Americans some easy wins that way? But that doesn't mean buckling under pressure where our fundamental interests are involved, like agriculture. And that's where I said, Maria, our negotiators, I'm sure, are no fools. They've been properly briefed, and if a fair deal is possible, they will come up with one, and we should embrace it. But if not, let us walk away with our dignity intact. And let us say, on the 27th of August, if we are being charged 50%, and China is not, Pakistan is not, others are not, we'll say, fine, Mr. Trump, any American goods that you are selling to us, we're also putting 50% tariffs on you. Let's see how you enjoy it. Goodbye.
All right, Dr. Tharoor, pleasure speaking to you. Thank you for your perspective and thank you for your time here on NDTV, sir.
Thank you. Bye, Marie.